on the Craftsman Online podcast and bringing back some of our favorite guests from last year into this year. Happy to bring him back for another appearance. Worshipful Brother Will Rothery. Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast.
Thank you again for having me. I very much appreciated the last talk that we had, and I'm really excited to get into this one.
So you can tell that like winter season is upon us. I mean, obviously, for those that are watching the YouTube live stream, they can see the hoodie sweatshirts. But this isn't a clean face, clean shaven Will anymore. You got the
Mhm.
the
Bit of
winter coat
scruff.
coming in. Yeah, you gonna go full beard this winter or
Oh, I don't think so. I'll probably be shaving in a
no?
couple days here.
Nice, gotcha.
I
Just a
go on and
weekend
off.
beard.
Hmm.
So this is the first of 3 episodes that we'll be doing on the well, hey, now what? I just got my Master Mason's degree. What do I do? And Will and I had been kind of talking about ideas for podcast topics, and he's well, how about if we do this series? So I love that we're going to be putting this together to kind
Hmm.
of help newly raised Master Masons at least get off on the right foot when it comes to starting their successful Masonic career. We always kind of look back and there had to be either ourselves or a brother that we knew where sometimes it was that experience that gives you the idea to say, I want to work ahead so that somebody else doesn't have to go through those same bad misfortunes or those bad steps. Was there any particular brother or maybe some experiences that you had that kind of shaped your idea for this?
That's a really good question. And although I could literally go on a list of about 10 to 15 different guys, for the most part, I've just had some really good guys around me who are great mentors to me. Worshipful brothers, very worshipful, right worshipful brothers who's been very influential in me getting to the steps that I am and giving me the encouragement and just being able to have really good guys around you to help direct you and push you in the right direction. I think that's a big part of why I want to pass that knowledge and information on to the next brother.
Okay. And that's a key thing, I think,
Right.
for any person that's listening to this, whether you're just getting started or you're looking forward to wrapping up your degree and or being raised to a Master Mason degree by the end of this year. It's key that you're looking for a mentor. And whether your lodge
Mhm.
assigns one to you, some of them call them success coaches or mentors or education officers, whatever the term is that's used, there's usually that partnership that starts to happen. And hopefully, in those conversations, I feel like if you're beginning to form a real relationship and a real friendship with this man, with this brother, you should be able to start talking about, like, hey, this is what I'm kind of interested outside of the ritual study that you'll be doing. And I know from firsthand experience and working with new guys, really all they're thinking about is like, okay, I want to get from the EA to the fellow
Mhm.
craft to then become a master mason. Very few brothers that I've ever met are like, I want to become a Scottish Rite 32nd degree Mason as soon as I can, or I'm ready to get into the York Rite or to the Shrine. Would you say that's kind of fair? Like, not a lot of guys think about what else is out there after that third degree.
I definitely agree. I think a lot of people just kind of they have this goal to get to Master Mason, and then whether or not their calendar's full or whatever. But I think I definitely do believe that there's enough people out there on either the York Rite side or the Scottish Rite side that are kind of nudging their new Masonic brothers. But I think the big thing to really think about when you are thinking about going one side or the other is one, what group has more friends that you're aware of. I think that's a good way of looking at it. And two, if you're really interested in learning a little bit more about the Hieramic legend, I think that's a really important thing to think about when you are thinking about kind of going that way.
Yep. And I want to talk more about my answer to that. So I'm going to put
Hmm.
just a tiny little pin. Well, you know what? Actually, I will get into that right now. I think
Hmm.
the one thing I always tell newly raised brothers is I'm working with them to get through that proficiency so that they can become a master mason. As I say, look, a lot of people are going to approach you with all of the wonderful other concordant bodies and
Hmm.
groups that exist in the family of Freemasonry. But here's what I want you to do. It's okay if you go visit those, but just don't join them. Give yourself 1 year here in the Blue
Mhm.
Lodge just to see what it's like to be a Master Mason. Maybe you'll get involved with a committee, or we'll get you involved in some of the lodge events that we're doing, or we'll travel to another lodge, or there'll be a program that'll happen in the jurisdiction, and it'll just be something that really captivates you because you just don't know. And we kind of don't really know. We have an idea of things we think you might be a good fit for, but just
Mhm.
don't go jumping right into the concordant bodies unless that's something that's been on your mind or in your plan from like day
Mhm.
one. That's what I always tell guys.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's great advice because I think a lot of people don't really stop to well, smell the flowers per se, in the sense that, when you become a master mason, that's when you have the world opens up to you. You can go travel on your own now. You can go to different lodges. You can go to anywhere in the world that is a recognized lodge as long as you have your dues card. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that, they get a little some people might get a little ahead of themselves and think that, oh, I'm going to, join the line, or I'm going to, or join the line of officers, or I'm going to go, go into Scottish Rite or York Rite, or I'm going to go become a Shriner or something like that. And I do fully agree with you that I think once you take that step of Master Mason, that's your building block now to either soak up more information, understand more. You can definitely read just about any Masonic literature at that point that really opens up and broadens your perspective of just Blue Lodge alone. I think people kind of finish Master Mason degree and kind of think that, oh, that's it for me. That's it for Blue Lodge. I've obtained what I can. And honestly, there's so much more to Blue Lodge alone. Um, I definitely think that going and visiting and seeing other degrees and seeing how other lodges do their work. I think that's one of the most important parts in the first year after becoming a master mason is really soaking in that information, soaking in that knowledge, and just going and seeing how other lodges work and how other lodges function. Because not all lodges are the same, as much as I'm sure people think that they are very much the same. And there are a lot of lodges, probably even in your jurisdiction, that have very similar ways that they do things and very similar work. But you'll be astonished when you start to go out and you start to visit with other lodges and start making meaningful connections with other brothers. Who knows, if you did a really good job on your master mason prove up and there were some guys in your district that seen you do it, then they might ask you to do the working tools or something at their installation, or maybe they have a fellow craft degree coming up or a master mason and they really liked how you presented yourself. Those are really good ways of getting your foot in the door to doing ritual for other lodges. And especially if you're building your relationships with people in those lodges, it definitely helps to um, start to build a bit of a path before you start taking off on, concordant independent bodies.
Yeah, yeah. If I was to give Michael's keys or things to look for after you become a master mason, before you go do the other stuff, as I like to
Hmm.
say, because the other stuff, it's going to be there. That's what
Hmm.
I always tell people, like, "Oh, you're not a member of the shrine?" I'm like, "No, it will be there when I retire and I have time to dedicate to that." What about Scottish Rite? Again, York Rite. They'll all of those things will still be there. They're not going anywhere. And I've been a
Hmm.
master mason now for just over 10 years. Like, I'm at that point. So what I always tell brothers is there's two things I can guarantee they're going to happen for you. Number one is that after you are raised to the sublime degree of master mason, 9 out of 10 lodges do this to their new members. They come down and they say, "Hey, would you like to be a steward for the lodge?" It's gonna happen. And
Hmm.
here's why. It's because they want to get you involved. And that's a great way for you to kind of get hooked into the leadership line, to try things
Hmm.
out. Not that being hooked is a bad thing. I think this is a great thing. You're basically responsible for helping set up the lodge room, help out at dinner times. There's typically in most jurisdictions, there's no speaking parts for the ritual that are associated with
Hmm.
that. You just get to sit there and learn and watch. I think it's a great thing. It's a great honor. And if after a year it's not your thing, you can say,
Hmm.
"I really don't want to be an officer. I'd like to do this, or I'd rather go do that." So that's why I always
Hmm.
say, stay home for that year after you get that Master Mason's degree. And by home, I mean home in your Blue Lodge.
Hmm.
The second thing, as crazy as this is going to sound, I'm with you. I think the number one thing that you should do after you get raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason is travel throughout your jurisdiction.
Mhm.
And it's for all the things that you said, Will. You are going to see traditions and other parts of the culture that's everybody has a favorite restaurant in town that maybe serves the same food, and now you're going to find out why so and so likes this lodge or so and so likes this particular restaurant, because
Mhm.
as you said, you match that personality. The third thing I would advise brothers to do is participate in an upcoming degree in your lodge, whichever one that you can. And if the only role that you can really help out with is being a conductor for a degree, that's awesome, because lodges
Mhm.
always need that. Or maybe you find a non speaking part and you're just there. It's awesome because you're giving back to the craft and you're setting precedents to help the next guy. And it's
Mhm.
also going to help enrich your experience. Because I can guarantee, unless your lodge, after you did your EA degree and took you to 5 other EA degrees that were happening around in your town or your area, that was the only time you saw it, and you missed so much of it because your
Mhm.
mind was focused on being the candidate, where now your mind is going to be focused on being in the audience. So those
Yeah.
are my quick 3 hot takes right there of things that you must
Mhm.
do after you become a master mason.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you on that. And in all honesty, I think even more emphasis on the fact of going and seeing other degrees, even go and see your own degree 5 times, because I'll tell you something. Those degrees are going to mean a lot more to you, and they're going to have a lot different of a meaning every time that you go and see it. And the more you pay attention to each one of them, especially if you go outside of your either in your district, a lot, basically a lodge inside or outside your district, and go and see how they do work as well, because you'll see parts of the ritual that you didn't even know existed.
So I'm going to make this analogy simple so that if you're just a listener with a general interest in Freemasonry, you might be able to relate to this part of the conversation, because it's going to be based around how your viewpoint can change later in an experience.
Mhm.
So, like, for example, if you were to say going through the degrees of Freemasonry, the entered apprentice and the fellow craft, those first 2 degrees, and to some extent the third degree, is a lot like having a learner's permit, where,
Mhm.
yeah, you're driving, but you're not on your own, if you know what I mean. You
Yeah.
have somebody else in the other seat that has the driver's license. Well, now, what was that? So think about that. The first time that you got in the car to learn how to drive, whoever taught you and whatever, everyone remembers that. Now, do you remember the first time you got behind the wheel with your driver's license and got to go wherever you wanted, however you wanted to get there, because you had your own license? So that's the question I ask is, how does Freemason's viewpoint change about the craft once they are now raised to that sublime degree of being a master mason?
Well, I think I think there's a lot of explanations to how your view changes, but I think at the core of it, I think most Masons' views change in the perspective of you think that you're going through, like, you get the EA, you get the fellowcraft, you're getting a grasp of what's going on here. But then you get the Master Mason degree, and it's so filled with so much knowledge and so much information. And it really just rounds out the rest of Blue Lodge for you in a way that now you can move whatever way you want. You can, if you want to join these bodies or whatever, that's totally up to you. But now you can really start to understand Masonic literature. You can really start to go back to the first 2 degrees and see what foundations they had that really built up to this Master Mason, to this new perspective that you have now, where you can go and travel freely. Again, like what you were saying with the analogy about having your own driver's license, you don't have to get tagged along to a lodge now as an EA or a fellow craft. You can now go and visit with other lodges and build these meaningful connections with these other brothers, inside or outside of your jurisdiction. And it's just a very beautiful thing. You can now become a lodge officer. And I think I don't necessarily agree with becoming a lodge officer right after becoming a master mason, but just knowing in the back of your mind, there's all these different steps, there's all these different directions that you can go. And I think that's really important when you have these viewpoints and these understandings that there's so many different directions that you can go. But in the big sense, I think it really is just an eye opener when you really start to break down a lot of the knowledge and information that's in the Master Mason degree that really helps to give you this new profound perspective on Masonic understanding, and even the fact that we really touch on death in the third degree. And I won't get any further into it than that, but it's very much something that we all have to come to grips with, because that's something that's going to meet us one day altogether. And I don't think a lot of people thinking when they're going through their EA and their fellow craft that they're going to get hit so hard with such a moral lesson at in the third degree that it really just hits home. And the allegory that's built into the third degree, I don't think a lot of people are really expecting that going through the EA and fellow craft. You get the idea that you're building yourself up, you're building up on building blocks here, but really when you hit that Master Mason degree, and it really it hits you like a ton of bricks, and it really just gives you such a rounded idea of what it is that you've really gotten yourself into. And I think it really gives a great perspective when you finally reach that finish line, and now you have carte blanche to basically go off on any literature that you want. You can pick up any Masonic book. You can, you have so much more freedom now. And so I think those are good things to view now that you're a Master Mason.
Yeah, I love how you put it that way, because I always tell guys in the early on stages when they're now an EA, they just got that first degree, and I meet with them and I'm like, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take everything you know about Freemasonry right now, and if your brain was a computer, just kind of put that into a little folder and just kind of just stash it away, because
Hmm.
it's just there. And now we're going to kind of indoctrinate you on how we want you to think about Freemasonry. And it's very structured. Our learning process is super structured. With
Hmm.
it starts with the memorization, the catechism. You're learning about working tools, you're learning about specific lessons that are coming through in all of the degrees. There's the dissecting of what these bigger thoughts now mean, and you're getting little, breadcrumb trails, I would say, as you're pointing out about all of this. And then you get to, as you mentioned, like, boom, I'm raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason. I witnessed the Heramic legend. If that's the real story of Freemasonry, that's interesting. Well, now
Hmm.
what do I do? And then that's the next conversation that you got to start picking up with somebody, is like, if they're still seeking that knowledge, which I hope that they are. I don't
Hmm.
think most guys just give up on learning after they get their third degree. I just feel like we don't really have anything more for them to do, at least in the structure as it exists now. Now it's time for you to do what I call free range learning.
Hmm.
Like, go find that topic or that subject. Like, let's go back. Was it something in the first degree? Was it in the second degree? The middle chamber, the winding staircase lecture? Was it in the third degree, a piece of the Heramic legend, or
Hmm.
just some of the ritual or symbolism that exists in the conferral of the degree, the obligation part? Like, was there something in there that you had a question about? Because now we can actually go explore that
Hmm.
somewhat together. I can point you in the right direction. You could go get some books and watch some videos. We can just start talking about it to kind of ignite that fire in your mind. And I think
Hmm.
that that's such a key conversation to have with brothers, because I know that that night or that afternoon or whenever that takes place that they get the third degree, it's all like high fives, like, let's have a cigar. You're signing the rolls of the lodge, like you are an official member. Like, whew, we have. It's like feeling like you graduated from college,
Hmm.
right? But then, as you pointed out, like, there is that what's next conversation. And I think that's just where, as the mentor or the lodge brother, you should have been involved with this young man or this man's life for the past year to get a sense of what they're into, so that
Hmm.
you can say, hey, I remember that presentation that we had, or there was this question that you asked me that I told you we'll talk about later. Like, let's get into this now. Like, I think that's a really critical time to have that conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And, there's a lot of conversations I think we need to have with these brothers after the fact. Like, I think, there's some very complicated and complex conversations that you can have just around the Hiramic legend, and whether or not, I've heard people talk about the Hiramic legend like it's actual fact, and although there are factual elements of the story. It really is a fictitious story that we apply to Freemasonry. And I think that's one thing that there's a lot of times where we have a hard time kind of discerning from what's fiction, and we kind of just fill in the blanks to kind of make this allegorical story really resonate with what we're doing in Freemasonry, and really bringing this stone builder element to it that's really this giant metaphor about you building yourself up as this magnificent architectural building that you really build yourself. And I think having really deep conversations, especially about, like you were saying, about the first degree and the second degree, and talking about these allegorical stories that we tell. I mean, one thing in Freemasonry is we don't really explain that stuff, and there's a big reason for it. One of the big reasons why we don't really explain the allegory very further, unless you're kind of, chatting about one specific thing. Sometimes you might have somebody come in your lodge who's a lecturer or an education officer, and maybe they might pick something from the one of the degrees, like 357 steps or something like that, and they go and they focus in on something very specific that maybe you just kind of glossed over, and you're just like, oh yeah, that was really cool, but I'm going on to the next thing now. And now when you're done the Master Mason degree, you can finally go back and reflect on all three of the degrees and all these different allegories that you were given in each one, that maybe you didn't really sit down and resonate with it when it really first happened. And that's again why we
Mhm.
were kind of reiterating on going and watching the degrees again. It's not even a bad idea to sit down with one of your mentors, or maybe the mentor that you had through your three degrees, and talk to him about these different stories, or these different pieces of the degree that were very educational, that we kind of just roughly go past on, and we don't really touch on that very much. And those are really the types of things that, one, as being mentors, we need to point these out to these younger masons or masons who are coming up, and really point out to them these very specific things in the different degrees, and maybe not get too into the weeds about it, but just give them a little bit more so that they understand that there's more meat on the bone than they really think that there is. Because sometimes
Mm.
you just kind of gloss over some of these parts of the degrees, and you just think, okay, that was cool, but you kind of come back to it, and it has a lot more meaning when you really go back to it, and look over it. And I think on it's on the brother in particular who's going through those experiences to go back and learn a little bit more about what you went through and what you did. And I think, definitely sitting down with a mentor, and having a chat about it, I think is a great way of opening those doors for you and introducing you to this whole other side of masonry that's not quite guarded or very secretive, but it's just not something that we really talk in large lengths about in the middle of lodge. And it's really, those are the opportunities where you kind of have to go out of your way to learn a little bit more.
So I want you to put on your past master's hat, Will. No, don't go looking for it, just figuratively. I want you to yeah, there we go. Nice. And as a past master myself, I was fortunate during my year that we actually had a brother that was going through the degrees. And it was
Mhm.
special because, as you're kind of touching on, for some of us that this is our ninth, 10th, we're past year 5, right? We're not picking up the
Mhm.
cipher anymore. We're just going to lodge meetings. They've kind of turned into these business meetings where occasionally there's a cool program or speaker that kind of catches our interest. And we think about it maybe when we're driving home, and a little bit the
Mhm.
next couple days, and then we get back to reality, right? But I think it's really special when you have that new guy, because he's coming in with just this whole new perspective. And hopefully, the Lodge brothers are kind of like coalescing around him, and they want to put on a good experience for him. But
Mhm.
it also provides an opportunity for them to get some new learning or refresh learning as well. And it kind of becomes a year for all of us going through that brother's experience. Have you had that in your lodge, or in your lodge settings?
Uh, yeah, I mean, to some extent, we have a couple guys going through right now. One of the guys, I actually started mentoring him, so it was really kind of it was a really great experience for myself. I started mentoring him right before I went in as master, and then about like we got through the EA degree, and then we were just getting up to the fellow craft degree, and he just I they basically pulled me away from doing that so that I could just continue to start running the lodge at that point. And now I've been on this 2-year journey, and so I got to do his master mason degree this in the summertime here, and that was just it was phenomenal to be able to be there with him throughout his whole journey and watching him going through his degrees and really being there as a good support and being able to really watch him flourish as a man and a mason. And then we have another guy who just got his actually, he's just about to get his fellow craft degree. He just proved up last month at our last meeting, and we're doing his fellow craft degree at the end of January, which is right before I go out of the East in the first weekend of February. So for me to be able to see those guys coming through the lodge, and I didn't necessarily get to do EA fellow craft master mason, but I've gotten to do fellow craft. I've gotten to do a master mason degree, and now I get to
That's
do
cool.
another fellow
Yeah.
craft degree, which I'm was just so ecstatic to see these guys coming through the lodge, and they have fantastic prove ups. They were just like the the best guys that you could possibly imagine coming through our lodge. And we haven't had a whole lot of guys coming through ever since COVID. And before that, if anything, we've almost probably had more of a decline of our older members passing away more than we're really getting in. But man, it's phenomenal getting to see some of these guys coming in and just getting to watch their journey and to be a part of it. Because as much as we like to believe or not, as masters of the lodge, I think we do have a really big part in how these guys perceive their Masonic experience, how they get their degrees, and just being there, watching these guys go through. I think it's a really that's one of the parts of masonry that I really enjoy, is getting to help other people build themselves up and to watch them go through the different degrees and watch them leveling up and stepping themselves up. So it's really exciting. And then you know
Mm.
hopefully one day, you might inspire them to want to go through the lodge themselves and maybe become a master, go through the line of chairs. But at the end of the day, nobody should feel pressured to go through the chairs or anything like that. Like, you're going through the degrees, you're getting the knowledge, and if you just want to be a guy on the sides, there's nothing wrong with that. But you definitely can add a little bit more to your experience if you decide to go through the chairs. That's for sure.
I would agree on that one. Coming up, just want to give our listeners some chance. We will or some time. We will have a hot take question alert coming up. This is
Mm,
not it, but it's just one of those questions that I want you to start salivating as we get ready to talk about Masonic rings. Ooh. But first, you had made a comment that I had to jot down a note. I'm like, we got to bring this up. Um, you mentioned that as a newly raised master mason, that they need to basically be an active participant
mhm,
in their role in the lodge and their role in their own Masonic career. And honestly, dude, I could not agree with you any more than that. I love that point. I
mhm,
do compare and relate to you when you talk about, as someone who has conferred degrees. I look at the now men brothers that I conferred their EA degree. It's
mhm.
like having another child. Like, I'm interested in their career. I'm always looking out for their development. I'm like the godfather. I have that feeling, right? It's such a valid thing. And if you're new and you don't know, that's okay.
Mhm,
But you can't expect the lodge to chart this course for you on what your Masonic career is going to be. So I'd like to hear more of your take on this, because I think I come from a different generation. But my
mhm,
thing is that if you feel like you're not getting it, or you have questions, how would you encourage a brother to open up or ask those questions, to find that path, to find that footing, if they just don't feel like they're brave enough to walk up and ask what they would think is a stupid question?
mhm. Man, I think one of the best places that you can look is either talk to your mentor or somebody who was really helping you through your degrees. I think that's a really good place to start. Or if you don't feel like you're getting quite the questions that you're looking for from your mentor, there's always a handful of guys in your lodge, I'm sure, that are past masters or who are worshipful masters. Sometimes it's not a bad thing to go up to your worshipful master and ask them some questions, or, ask for a little bit of guidance, ask for a bit of direction almost, because I think these are the type of guys, although they might not have all the time in the world to sit down with you and have in-depth conversations with you. I think these are definitely the type of members that you should be seeking out if you're looking for something more in lodge. I definitely suggest being a part of your board of general purpose. And if your lodge happens to own its own building, you probably have a temple board as well. And those are very, very good things to get into. You really understand how the lodge works and operates outside of the lodge room. And I think that's a
Hmm.
really good way of really rounding out and helping you understand like the business of the lodge, how we run a lodge. The first couple of years that I was a Freemason, I really went to a lot of these Board of General Purpose and temple meetings. And it's a big eye opener, especially when you are part of a temple board that's running a building and you have multiple different groups like Eastern Star or Royal Arch or, um, or Scottish Rite or York Rite more especially, but any one of the three York Rite degrees or systems. But you know, being a part of these, it really, either one of those groups, the Board of General Purpose of the Temple, it really helps open up the doors and understand how the lodge runs and how it's all put together. And I think those are very important things to just understanding a little bit more about the function and how everything runs, and
Hmm.
and the laws that you're bound by, the jurisdiction that you might be in might allow you to do certain things that other jurisdictions, stuff like that. Like, these are all good things to get into and understand, but I definitely think that if you're kind of straying along and you're really not too sure, like, what's the next direction for me, where should I be going, what kind of literature should I be reading, or what things should I be focusing on, don't hesitate to talk to some of those older brethren. There might even be a guy in your lodge, an older guy who's been a Mason for 50 years, and you've never even had a conversation with him. Go up to him, chat him up, whether or not you see him at the dinner or you see him before a meeting or what have you. Go up to these guys and chat with them. First of all,
Mm.
I'll tell you, those guys will be really excited and happy that you sought them out to ask them questions. So I think that's a really good thing to focus on is those, learning a little bit more about how the lodge works, and just going out of your way and talking to some of these senior members and really pick their brain.
All right, time for a hot take here. We're going to talk about the
Hmm.
Master Mason ring. Uh, First of all, you're in Canada,
Yeah.
so are Masonic rings as big of a thing in Canada as they are here in the States?
Yes, they are. I
Okay.
mean, I'm not 100% sure about how big it is in the States, but I know places like England for a long time, they've really they'll spin their ring around when they're out in public, and they're very
Yeah.
secretive. I know in North America, we're a little bit more open about having our rings. And yeah, around here, it's definitely, when you go to a lodge meeting, if you don't see a guy with a ring on his hand or multiple rings on their hand, it's almost more shocking than it is anything else.
Well, perfect person to ask this question. So, what's your take? What are your thoughts on Masonic rings? And more specifically, I'd like for you to speak to the part of this. Like, do you consider them a necessary part of a Master Mason's identity?
Now,
Keep in mind, we're in 2025 now.
yeah, yeah, no, I totally understand. Yeah, no, I mean, in the new age, I think that having a ring is really good. I think that having a ring, especially when you're out and about and you're doing things, I think that having a Mason ring is almost an important identifier, but I don't think that it's necessarily the thing that makes a Mason. Well, or even identifies a Mason as a Mason. In some senses, it does. I can't complain because I'm wearing my ring right now, but I did want to mention the fact that I think that it's a really good way of presenting yourself out in public. I think when people see that ring, it gives them an opportunity to come up to you and talk with you and just kind of spark a conversation. I think some people either know what the square and compass is or they're unaware and they just think that it's a nice ring and might talk you up about it. That could open the doors to somebody who's either been thinking about joining Freemasonry or just somebody who doesn't have any idea about Freemasonry in any way, shape, or form. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that I rarely ever wear my ring. I literally put my ring on before this meeting because I knew that this was a conversation we were probably going to end up having. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily believe in wearing a ring everywhere you go. For me, my fingers swell up quite a bit, and I have a hard time getting that ring off at times. And so, in that regard, I don't always wear my ring. I do wear my ring when I do lodge meetings and stuff like that. But there is definitely, I think, wearing a ring out in public and wearing a ring when you go places, when you do family events, stuff like that. I think it's a good way to get a good conversation starter. And
Mm.
I think it's a good symbol so that people can see it and be like, hey, or it's a good way of other brothers being out and about that you've never met before in your entire life. I guarantee you, if you're out and about and you're wearing your ring and another brother recognizes your ring, they will come up to you and ask you what lodge you're from, like, where you go to lodge, so on and so forth. And it's a great common conversation starter for either non-Masons or people who have been brothers, for quite some time or not some time at all. But it's a
Mm.
great identifier.
Yeah, my history with a Masonic ring, um, it started in the preparation room. We were getting ready
Mhm.
to go in for the third degree as part of my class. There was quite a few of us that were going in to get our degree that night, and the brother was playing with it. It was in his jacket pocket before we had to, switch into the costume that we wear. And I was
Mhm.
like, "Where did you get that?" And he's like, "Oh, but don't tell anybody, but I've had this for a while. I can't wait until we take the obligation and then I'm officially a
Yeah.
master mason and then I can't wait to put this on." And I'm like, yeah. I immediately thought of like the movie scene where it's like, are some secret powers and it get unlocked like lightning bolts. And
My
so
patience.
I was like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, "Well, it's not my grandfather's Masonic ring, but it's like
Mhm.
styled after it. And I went to a jeweler and they built it and, they designed it and yada, yada, yada." I'm like, "Okay." So it had a special meaning. It wasn't like something that he just went and bought off of like a
Mhm.
website or something. Okay, cool. And I kicked it around for a long time. I think I was a 5-year Mason, I think, when I finally bought the Masonic ring that I have, which is in a jewelry box. I probably wear it now 3 or 4 times a year just because I don't want it to get all scratched up.
Mhm.
And I've kind of moved on that. That's why I was asking the question about the Master Mason's identity, where I don't feel like I need a Masonic ring so much
Mhm.
anymore to talk about being a Freemason with people. Um, Personally, I think there are so many other options that exist as well. Like I've seen really cool Masonic bracelets.
Mhm.
Now there's guys that are getting Masonic tattoos in very visible places, and they're cool.
Mhm.
This very cool symbolism. There's always the tags that people put on the back of their car, thinking that's going to help out with a police ticket. It doesn't. Trust me. um, so I would say that, to brothers that want to get it, if it's a family heirloom or it's something that's meaningful to you, of course,
Mhm.
do it, get it. If you're sitting here going, well, I feel like I'm a master mason now, I should probably get a ring. It's like, no, don't do anything you don't really want to do. You
Mhm.
don't have to have one to be a master mason.
Yeah, the rings aren't exactly cheap these days, and I
There's that
definitely
too, yeah.
don't. I don't think that you need a ring to identify yourself as a Freemason. Like you were saying, there's many different ways of presenting yourself as a Freemason out in public. I have a vest that has a big square and compass on it. I also have a big rain or like a nice blue rain jacket, very much the color of lodge blue, and it's got a big square and compass on it, and it's got my lodge right on the back. So those are great ways of signifying that you're a Freemason out in public. You don't necessarily need a ring. I mean, even with me, I didn't buy a ring for, I want to say, like 4 or 5 years at least. It might even have been in my sixth year that I finally bought a ring. And I had a
Mm.
couple cheap rings here and there that I just kind of liked, wearing, that I didn't break the bank on. And it was, really nice. But, I went out and I wanted to find a nice ring. My ring's quite a bit smaller than most would, but it was exactly what I wanted. It was exactly what I was looking for, and I very proudly display it when I go to lodge meetings. But other than that, I don't wear it that often. So I do agree with you on the sense that I don't think you need a ring to identify yourself as a Freemasonry or a Freemason, but I definitely think that it makes a good, conversation starter in that sense. And
Speaking of
obviously,
conversation,
yeah,
yeah,
I
go
was just
ahead.
gonna say, and obviously if it's a family heirloom, totally understand.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of conversation starters, a reminder, this is the first of 3 episodes that's going to be all about how to help you get on that path as a newly raised Master Mason so that you can have the best year and subsequent excellent Masonic years afterwards. Our next episode will be diving into the value of Masonic education. We tease a little bit about it here on this episode, but we're really going to go into beyond that ritual book and beyond book learning, and really how to incorporate that Masonic mysterious, I would say, Masonic symbolism into
Mm.
everyday life, because they always say make it a part of your everyday life, and you're like, how do we do that? So we will leave you, the listener, with that. If you've enjoyed this episode,